So during my undergrad days, I lived with a roommate who was my best friend in high school. We knew each other very well. We were from the same culture. Our families were very well aligned, but we hated each other shortly after living with one another as a roommate. And looking back, here's what I've learned and the reasons why this roommate relationship didn't work out in the end. So a lot of times people choose their friends, primarily, especially their best friends, to become their roommates because they think they will get along very well. They already know the person's personality. It will be a lot of fun. At the same time, when I was in undergrad and I was picking a roommate to live off campus in my upper years, we both felt the same way. We both thought that if we could live with one another, it would be very fun. And since we were already really good friends, we didn't perceive any barriers in the future. But shortly after living with one another, we soon realized we hated each other as roommates. We ended up living with one another and a few of our friends for 3 years in the same apartment. But she and I kind of had a fallout, and it was because of our differences in living lifestyles. So it was interesting, and maybe a lot of people won't do this. Is that when we all moved in together, the three girls, we decided that instead of, each one buying our own groceries and cooking our own meals, we would do a communal thing where we would all buy groceries together. We would all pitch in into a pool fund, and we would all take turns cooking. And same thing with household chores, etc. So we really ran as a family style apartment versus, being roommates where, each of us had our own cupboard space, each of us had our own fridge space. We all decided we would all pitch in and do it family style. And initially it was very fun. It was definitely, an experience. It reminded us of home a lot. And of course, the thing about this is that very soon after, I realized that my best friend from high school didn't know how to cook, and I hated what she was making. And she was very, down on herself every time her meals came out horrendous, even though we would eat it. I also realized that she was quite lazy and not very street smart, in a sense that whenever we went out to buy groceries, she didn't really know what to do. If we sent her to go, pick up toilet paper and down the aisle, she would spend there for, almost the entire time we were at the grocery store trying to figure out which one to buy. She was also quite selfish in the sense that she really liked streaming back then. So she would often use all of the internet, like all the Wi-Fi bandwidth, so she could, stream movies and also download at the same time, which really impacted myself and my other roommates' ability to actually do coursework. Like our pages wouldn't load to the point where we couldn't even call our families because there would be so much of a lag, and we kept upgrading our internet over and over again to nearly like the highest plan you can possibly get. But her internet usage was just so high, to the point that it was quite selfish in my opinion, because she just had no disregard of, how this would impact her other two roommates. And of course, at one time I thought, am I the one who was too picky in terms of her living lifestyles? Was I too harsh on, trying to think of how my household would have been back home versus now? Like, was I the one who wasn't as open-minded? But, when I finally had a chat with the other roommate about these issues that I was perceiving, the other roommate also agreed. She also thought that our roommate, my best friend at the time, was quite selfish, and that she also lacked street smart savviness, and that she did a lot of things that irked us in the wrong way. Even though, we all have been friends, for a very long time. We knew each other as a friend capacity, but we liked her as a person, we liked her as a classmate, we liked her as a friend hanging out. But when it came to living with one another, this was a different ball game. And none of us perceived, these to be issues until we started living with one another. And of course, you wouldn't have found out of these little quirks of one another, until you started living with one another, right? So the issues with living with a best friend is that oftentimes you go into this living arrangement thinking it'll be, great and amazing time. but oftentimes and a lot of times, a lot of roommates fall out for very similar reasons, with a very similar story I just told. It's not uncommon for people to switch roommates, in each year because of that particular reason. And for us, we stuck it out to the end. We all lived with one another for in all 3 years of our upper years in undergrad. But looking back, would I have chose her as a roommate again? Maybe, because I think a lot of students, like I said before, are in the mindset of choosing a friend regardless. But I think maybe looking back, I think, being a roommate is good, but maybe had we not gone into that communal family style arrangement, that would have been better, because she wouldn't have been so harsh on herself on not being able to cook and how to do household chores. We wouldn't have figured out that she wasn't very household chores, grocery savvy, had we not, go to grocery stores together. So yes, of course, looking back, there's in hindsight, there could have been a lot of different things, a lot of different policies and procedures we could have implemented to try to make this situation work a little bit better. But it really boils down to your, living personalities. Everyone has their quirks at home. Every household's a little different, and you don't really know that until you start living with the person. And to the point, you really have to balance how much stuff do you want to implement to make the living arrangement work. It comes to a point where it just isn't worth it anymore, and some people end up, walking away. So if you're considering living with your best friend, these are some of the things you need to consider before moving in with one another. You have to really talk out, how much bandwidth of Wi-Fi do you need? Do you want to do it family style, or do you want it to do like essentially roommate style, where you segregate different areas for your personal items? These are really important questions to ask. And I think when you're living in a res, oftentimes, even if you don't have a roommate picked, you end up answering some sort of personality questionnaire for the housing department to match you out with a suitable roommate. And this is really what they're trying to get at, is trying to find a potential match for you based on your living preferences. So if you're looking for a friend to be a roommate, consider your living preferences, and not just picking it based off of who's your favorite friend, because your favorite friend might not be the most suitable for you in terms of living arrangement wise. So the top tip here is to really understand what your living preferences are and what theirs are too, and don't be too shocked or disappointed if you're in a similar situation as me, where your living arrangement didn't work out. It oftentimes isn't because of you or because of them. It oftentimes is just a mismatch of personalities. It's no different than, you meet people and not everyone becomes your friend, and not all your friend becomes your best friend. Things happen for a reason, and oftentimes there's no one to blame for it. But just know that, your personality goes beyond just who they are. As a friend, if you're trying to live with someone, you really have to deep dive and understand their living preferences as well.